there. My name's Carrie Lee. I oversee Webster University Career Planning Development Center services. So today we're going to talk about salary negotiation. So the first step in this process is to make sure that you understand your own values. So everyone is going to care about different things. There's not necessarily any right or wrong, but you want to know what is most important to you. The reality is that you probably will have to compromise on something, especially if you are earlier in your career, because no job is ever 100% perfect. So, do you care more about having a flexible schedule, having, a high salary potential, having a lot of job security? So, think about what matters most. The Life Values Inventory is a free online assessment, so you can make an account and do that if you wish. So, if you want kind of some more ideas, kind of being able to rank, consider those different values, that's just one good resource that's out there. As you're in a job searching process, you want to make sure that you're doing some salary research. So I'm going to talk about a few different places that you can do research, but some sites might require you to make an account. Some might allow you to access that information for free if you answer questions about current or previous employment, if you provide a review of a company. So that type of information. And, obviously you want to be professional. Most of them are anonymous, but you might still want to be careful about how you're phrasing things just to be vague and not identify yourself. Um, all of these sites work because people share their salary information or share their experiences. So, it is helpful to have valid data to help people out. So, a couple of examples. One is Glassdoor. So you can go to the salaries feature on their website and you can search by the job title and or the location because obviously, New York salaries are going to be different than Missouri or Alabama salaries. You can search on PayScale by job, location, the company, or the degree. So for some more common degrees, they have kind of aggregate information there. And then Zippia is another page that you can do to have job title and research salary that way as well. So these are a couple of examples of what this might look like when you're doing your salary research. So if you look on Zippia and look at the salary information for a marketing specialist, you can see that it kind of compiles data from several different websites. Obviously, they're all kind of pulling from slightly different data sets. So you can see that there's obviously variation here, but that might be helpful to kind of give you a sense of what a typical range might look like. Glassdoor is another one. So you can distinguish that by location. So same thing for a marketing specialist. It kind of gives you a breakdown of what might be typical, what's kind of the most likely that 25th, 75th percentile. So if you're somebody that is newer in your career, you're an earlier career professional, you're much more likely to be kind of on the lower end of the range versus somebody that has more experience, is farther along in their career. So again, you can see that there's definitely some overlap across all of these areas about what they're expecting. Pay scale, kind of has some nice breakdowns similarly for like different phases of your career. So you can kind of see how that looks for folks who have less experience versus more experience, kind of higher up on that curve. So again, similar ranges, just kind of a different way of displaying the information. And then ONET is a website that runs off of the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So that's a part of the federal government. And so if you go to ONET, you search for a particular job title like marketing specialist, and you scroll down to that wages and employment trends section, you can find, again, kind of that curve of here's the typical range. So again, you can see by metro area, by state, and by the United States averages overall. So this is a really nice breakdown to kind of compare by location. ONET has a lot of data that they run off of, but for some newer careers, they just don't have the same extent of data. So, for instance, social media manager is not necessarily a job title on ONET because they don't have 20 years of data on that the same way they would for a counselor or for an accountant. So just know that there are certain kind of like communications tech jobs then it might not be quite as specific on ONET. So when you're thinking about this as a job seeker, you also want to kind of understand what an employer thought process is like when they're thinking about salaries. So there are certain locations that legally require job descriptions to post a minimum or a salary range. So sometimes you may see those on job postings where, the salary range is 50,000 to 175,000. And that seems like a very unrealistic. That's a huge range. But sometimes that is just because they're, required to list that. And so they just sort of give like, here is the absolute least qualified, to the most qualified top of that range we would ever pay someone. So it may or may not be as useful for you to understand what would the most typical salary amount would be. Some places don't include any information about what the salary is on the actual job posting. They just communicate that as they're reaching out to interview you for the opportunity later on. Most companies of a particular size that kind of have HR departments, they generally have predefined types of job roles and titles. So, if you are a manager level position, this would be the salary range for this, or this is the range for a data analyst versus a financial analyst. So, just because they might have more money in their budget, they like you more. It is not always possible if HR has predetermined this is the range. Um, it might be something where there is a process for an exception, but that would require different types of approval, or there may not be any room for that. Some places will just kind of list like expected salary or a minimum salary because if they list the top of the range, often people will then ask for the top of the range, which may or may not be realistic depending on their competitiveness as a candidate. Different department budgets. What are the qualifications? So if you're somebody that you meet every single required and preferred qualification, you would generally expect to make a little bit more than somebody who meets maybe the core requirements, but they don't have all those extra things. Sometimes there are just issues with internal equity. So if somebody has been doing the same job title as you for the last 5 years, the labor market might be different. They might be offering a higher salary. And so they don't want to have you coming in making way more money than somebody who has more experience than you in that role. So sometimes that may be a limiting factor as well. Generally, companies want to kind of pay as little as possible to get the most qualified person. So labor market fluctuations can influence the salary of like what's typical, what can entice someone to work for that, and also what are those typical candidate profiles. Because if it gets to be a more challenging market and there's a lot of people who have been laid off, they're looking for something that can trickle down where then candidates who are really overqualified for the position, they may be willing to work for the same salary. And so then they're filling those roles rather than people who would be like more traditionally qualified and have a little less qualifications. So there are those kind of labor market things that can impact. And even if they don't post it on the job description, there are certainly a lot of folks who are hiring managers or recruiters that will ask about candidate salary expectations either in the actual application for the job and or in that first kind of screening interview. Because if they're asking early on, it just avoids wasting both of your time. Because if candidates are asking for something way beyond their budget, or it's just very clear that they don't understand the market and they say, oh, sure, I'd be happy with 50,000 and this job pays 150,000. That seems a little off. So it's just good to kind of get that out of the way. Know the value of the work and the skills that you're bringing to the table. So, look at a variety of resources. So those ones that I mentioned, like ONET or Glassdoor or Bureau of Labor Statistics. Look at industry job boards. So, sometimes different specific job boards for certain industries, types of roles, they may have kind of more specialized information. Sometimes professional associations will have information. So, the American Counseling Association might have done a survey about typical counseling wages and benefits. So you could look up that information on their site. So sometimes that might be restricted to members or it might be open to the public. So, kind of look at a variety of places so you're getting a better sense. Um, even just looking at job postings can kind of give you a sense of this one might be a little bit more of an outlier. This is like a bigger company that's paying a little better versus what are some of the other similar types of roles posting for. Think about what is realistic for you. You don't want to so undervalue yourself and, move for a job that's not going to allow you to financially support yourself. But if you are requesting something, really high or very low at the end of the spectrum, you might get screened out. So kind of think about what type of range or number would work for you. It's okay to ask for a little bit over what you want because employers will generally negotiate a little bit. They will try to negotiate down. Um, but whatever you're putting, you need to be okay with, because if you say you're okay with that number and then they offer that to you and you say, well, actually, I need way more than that, then that's going to feel like a mismatch. If you're looking at different locations, you can look at cost of living through sites like NerdWallet. You can look at real estate sites, like a Zillow or something, to see like what are housing apartment prices like in this area, things like that to help give you a sense. And the more that you can really articulate your value and have specific examples, this will help you in that negotiation process later on. So if you can say, well, I have this certification, I have this many more years of experience than you're asking for, I have these other skills, right? Those are reasons for them to pay you more. If you just want more money because life is expensive and you want more money, that is not a compelling argument to them. So if they are asking you about salary expectations, over the phone, in the application form, sometimes they ask for a specific number. So you literally have to type in a number in a text box. Sometimes you could type a range in. Sometimes you could just type, flexible, um, open to negotiation or something. They might ask you to confirm. So they might kind of reiterate that information in an interview to say, well, the expected salary for this is 60,000, or, the minimum for this role would be X. So if that's really off of what you're expecting, then that's kind of a conversation briefly if you want to keep moving forward in the interview process. And then generally, I would try to kind of let them come up with a number first. If they're being really pushy about it, it's not helpful for them at the end of the day if you like refuse to actually give any kind of number or answer, because again, they want to make sure they're not wasting their time or your time. So, if you're being really cagey, that's probably not going to help you out either. So it's okay to say, well, I was kind of hoping for something along this range. I can be a little bit flexible depending on the types of benefits or the full compensation package. What is the range for this role? What do you typically budget for this role? So you can kind of ask them, that's okay. See how that goes. And, also just kind of understanding your competitiveness as a candidate. So, knowing what the market is like. So if it is more challenging and there are really big applicant pools, know that, you might have a little less room to negotiate than if you're somebody who's coming in with a lot of very unique experience, you have way more, skills or certifications or things that they're asking for in the job description, that you probably have a little bit more room to negotiate or maybe have other choices if you feel like this one doesn't work out. And again, just try not to radically change your answer because that's not gonna ingratiate yourself to the employer later unless there's really new information. So sometimes it might be a situation where they're changing the job description. And so the way that it was written and the way that they're sharing it might be a little bit of a disconnect. Like maybe you would be taking on supervision of another employee in this role and that wasn't clearly articulated, then that might be a reason to negotiate more. But otherwise, you want to kind of be giving consistent answers. So first, you need to get an offer to kind of be able to negotiate. So they're generally, after you complete whatever round of interviews, it might be one, it might be two, might be more than that. And then different companies and different hiring managers will approach background and reference checks differently. Some may not do anything. Some may call your references and have a conversation with them. They might ask them to fill out a form. They may just have a background check just to kind of double check that, if you're in a sensitive government job, you don't have a, extensive criminal history. Or for some like financial roles, they may actually check your credit score because they want to make sure that, you don't have a horrible credit score and maybe you would be more open to like embezzling money down the road if you really have a hard financial situation or something. So there are situations where offers could be revoked. So sometimes it is like there's different legalities for this depending on the location, but they might say, you know what, if you have been convicted of this felony, like you are not eligible for hire for this role. If there's other negative information that comes out, like maybe you lied about a work experience you didn't actually have and you talked about that, put on your resume, or a degree that you started and didn't finish or something. Um, so it's possible that there could be a situation. So like if they do a background or reference check, they may just not offer you the job because they didn't offer it to you in the first place, or they may say, well, we offered you this position pending your background check and this discrepancy came up. So they might ask you to say, hey, could you give us some more information, explain, because sometimes there might be situations where it is like your name got confused with somebody else who has the same name, or your employer reported your job title slightly differently than what you listed, and that might not be a big deal. They just want to make sure that that discrepancy is addressed. So again, a lot of different legalities depending where you're at. When they make you an offer, know how long you have to make the decision. So generally they want a quicker decision because then they can kind of move forward with their process. Or if you say no, then they can go back to their next choice of candidate. It is always okay to ask for time to think. So if they are pressuring you to make a decision in that exact moment while you're on the phone with them or saying, we offered you this job and you have to tell us by the end of the day, that is kind of a red flag. Um, so asking for a couple of days is very normal. They might give you a week or two. Anything more than that is less common. It might be a situation where the job is not slated to start for another month or two because of, the way their company works, their fiscal year or something. So if you've got more time, they may have less urgency versus if they're filling a role that someone left and they want somebody in really quickly. It is also totally okay to ask questions before you accept or deny an offer. So, this is your time. If you have questions about the role, about the benefits that are available to you as an employee of the company, different policies, So it's a really good idea that you kind of get a general sense of what that healthcare coverage might look like. How much vacation, personal time, sick time would you get if you have the opportunity to work remotely or not. It depends on what you care about, but just to make sure that you're kind of looking at the full package and what they have to offer. So, depending on the type of role, the pay might be hourly or it could be an annual pay. Some roles might have the opportunity for commissions, like if it's a sales focused role, you might be eligible for certain bonuses at the company. And then benefits can really vary widely. So a lot of these benefits are often only available to full-time employees, not part-time. Some companies might offer things like on-site childcare, and plenty of others don't, right? There are some things that there are legalities around, maternity, paternity leave, depending on your location. And some things are just going to be very company policy dependent. So you might have the opportunity for different types of retirement matching, for supplemental insurance, for professional development funds that might help you keep your certification that you need to do your work, or go to a conference, or maybe like allow you to pursue a graduate degree that would be related to your role. So there's different types of things that are available. It's good to just kind of get a sense of what could be possible. There are other types of considerations as well. So, if you're thinking about an offer, what's the mission of that organization? What is that workplace culture like? What is their supervisor style like? Are they somebody that's really hands-on? They're very responsive to questions and concerns? Are they somebody that's super hard to get a hold of? They kind of just let you do your work. Are they more of a micromanager, right? Those things can very much impact your day-to-day experience, depending on kind of your personality and preferences. Um, are there opportunities to advance? So some companies have very kind of set standards for, if you have this many years of experience at the company, you're a junior analyst versus a senior analyst. There might be ways for you to move up in the department. There might be ways for you to move up in other roles in the company, or sometimes there aren't a lot of opportunities to move up from particular areas. Some types of different professional development support. What are the location concerns? So, what would your commute look like? Do you have to pay for parking? Is it going to be really stressful to find parking downtown if there's not a lot for that company? If you're moving from, Missouri to Minnesota, the weather will be a little bit different. You might have to deal with more snow than you're used to. So, all of these sorts of things can impact the timeline. So, if you have maybe vacation, other plans that are happening, you have to move, is the timeline something that's going to work for you? How the role is classified can matter. So, whether it's a role that maybe you are eligible for overtime, like if it's an hourly type of position, the job may or may not offer overtime. It might be expected or not. If somebody is an independent contractor, usually that's kind of that 1099 tax form status. That generally means that, you are not eligible for other benefits. So you would be paid for your work at, whatever salary level. But then if you have to get your own health insurance, your other benefits, that's something that is often more expensive. You might have to do your own tax withholding. So paying those taxes every year, because the employer is not calculating that and doing that for you. So, all things to think about. Whatever the offer is, try to get it in writing whenever possible. That offer letter could be something they email you. They might offer a job to you over the phone and kind of have a conversation with you and then say, okay, if you're interested in moving forward, I'll send the official written offer letter to you now that we've talked about some things. But it's often going to contain information like the start date, If there's a probation period. So it might be a situation where they say, you're under probation for your first 90 days. So if there are performance concerns, you could be let go in that period, or maybe you can't work from home for this certain period of time until you pass your probation or something like that. How many hours a week would the job be, the salary level. Know that, organizational policies can change, right? Supervisors can change. So you may have a job where you have particular hours if you're 100% work from home. And then if the company changes in a year or two and they say, well, no, actually, we want people to return to the office, that's possible. So it doesn't mean that it will protect you in every circumstance, but if there are things that you've negotiated, having that in writing is really helpful because, if for instance, you've been talking with a recruiter in HR at the company, and then the hiring manager has a difference of opinion with something that you talked about with them, or your boss changes, then at least you have something to point to say, well, yes, they had told me this was a policy or this was the way this worked, and you're not just totally going off of what you said over the phone. When you negotiate, tone matters. Regardless of the offer, however likely you are to accept it or not, express your appreciation. They took time out of their day to interview you. They are expressing interest in you as a candidate. So, be confident, be professional, and kind of know what your situation is. Like if you've been job searching for quite a while and you haven't found something, you might be a little bit less pushy about negotiating if you're somebody who has a lot of other options. Like if you already have a job you like, you're just trying to find a job that is even better or pays more, that can be a different situation. So when you're framing your response, same thing. Sometimes it matters just as much how you say it as what you say. So if you're saying, well, I have to have a minimum of this, amount to be able to accept the offer, that is going to be seen as much more direct and assertive. If you're saying, based on my market research and the level of experience I'm bringing to this job, I was looking for something closer to X amount, that is going to come across as a little softer, more collaborative. So that is up to you, and how you want to do that. Again, it is possible that offers can be revoked. So if they offer you something that is really low and that's just not going to work for you, for most positions, they can't offer you a huge difference. Like if they're offering you a salary of 50,000 and you say, "Well, I really need 80,000 to accept," that's very likely that they will just say, "Well, we're sorry, this just does not fit in our budget. So, sounds like we'll have to move on to our next candidate." And that's fine, because if that doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But if can be really hard at that point to claw back and say, no, 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 I actually would work for that amount. I just wanted more money. So, be mindful of how you're kind of framing that. If it feels like, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a good fit, like if they're kind of back and forthing with you over negotiating and they say, oh my gosh, they're trying to negotiate about these 20 different things and policies, and this kind of just seems like this is not going to work for us. I don't think they're going to be happy here if none of these things are meeting their standards. That could be a situation too. So, when you kind of thought about your values at the beginning of this process, what benefits do you value more? Think about how you can get those needs met from the employer. A lot of negotiation is often done over the phone because that's just kind of most typical. It's a little easier to react in the moment or to ask questions. It might be done in person or it might be done over email. So if you're somebody that gets really nervous and, maybe not all of your conversation is written down, but you want to kind of start the negotiation process over email, that's certainly something you could do. It is typically expected in the US to negotiate a little bit, so it's not unusual. Some are just not going to be able to negotiate very much. Like they might be offering the top of their salary range, and so they cannot offer anything more, or they couldn't without a lot of extra approval. Some have a pretty big range, so they might have a lot more flexibility. Sometimes policies are different. So some things might be negotiable at one company, and at another company, they say, nope, how much vacation time you have is set up by, your role classification. So it is what it is. Like there's no debating about that. You're just okay with it or not. So there is some research out there that if you ask for a more specific number, sometimes you're a little bit more likely to get that than if you're just asking for kind of a typical, rounded up whole amount. Be okay with silence. It's okay to, thank them for the job offer and let them know that while you're excited about it, you were kind of hoping for something closer to X because of, this experience you've had, your skill, certifications, whatever that might be. And then let them sit because they might be looking up information online to say like, okay, well, how much could I offer this, or what somebody else in that role is making to kind of maintain equity. So don't over explain, because if you pause and they're not instantly responding and you say, well, I mean, it's okay, I don't have to negotiate, then you're sort of losing that negotiating power, right? So it's okay to have a little bit of silence. Again, depending on the type of role and the type of company, some of these might be things you could negotiate, and some things aren't. So it is just very dependent. Sometimes they might be more informative. So when they're making the offer to you, they might kind of go through some of these benefits, or they might direct you to somebody in HR to talk to ask questions, because, every hiring manager might not know every part of the retirement, benefits matching process. But things like when you start working, sometimes, your schedule flexibility, like when you're working your hours, the salary, sometimes like the title, if you could have relocation assistance if you're moving or not. These could all be hypothetical. If you are an international student, this is something where, it is often a little bit more challenging to job search as an international student, because not all employers can or will hire international students. So think about what is most important to you in your long-term goals. Um, the more that you understand processes and how to explain whatever type of work authorization you have to an employer, the better off you're going to be. There are many, many employers who don't really have a strong understanding of different processes and work authorizations for international students. So, if you're an F1 student and, you could do CPT and OPT, and if your program is eligible for a STEM OPT extension, you could potentially work for 3 years without any form of sponsorship. And an employer might not realize that, because they might just hear that you're an international student and think, oh, well, visa sponsoring is expensive and complicated, and I don't know if we want to deal with that. So the more that you understand that, to hire you for an internship on CPT, the employer doesn't have to pay you anything extra, right? Like you're the one that has to do the paperwork, things like that. It is super important that you are always staying in compliance with your visa. So again, that you understand the rules, the timelines of when you can work and where and how. Pay attention to those changes. So things are always changing in the labor market, with different types of visa regulations. So again, understanding what the overall situation is of maybe how picky you can be, what types of experiences. Because again, for some types of work authorization, if they're requiring that your work has to be directly related to your degree, again, you want to make sure that it is as clearly and obviously related as possible. It is okay to ask about, the potential for future sponsorship or kind of the typical policies of the employer. This is not something I would ask about until later in the kind of interview hiring process. Um, a lot of places won't typically commit to sponsorship until they've seen you perform well. So if you're an F1 student, for instance, it's very common that you might get hired on OPT. If you are eligible for STEM extension and do that, or not. And then if they say, yes, we really like you, you've been doing great work for us, we want to keep you long term. And so, we'll kind of work out this process. Um, if you have a lot of prior experience, you have some very niche qualifications, it is possible for people to just sponsor you out of the gate. But again, that's less common. Sometimes there are certain types of roles that may have more potential. So, for instance, if it's a role that would be a good fit for something like an H-1B visa that would allow you to stay in the country longer, there are some roles that it would be really hard to meet the criteria for. And so they may say that, it just doesn't make sense for them to hire an international student in this role because there's not a good pathway to submit for a work visa. Like even if they want to keep you on, each work visa type is different and has different criteria. It's pretty common that bigger companies or multinational companies are going to be more familiar with the process of hiring international talent. It doesn't mean that small companies won't. Again, sometimes they may just not be as familiar if they haven't done it before, but if they have a smaller candidate pool and you're by far the best person, then they might be just as willing to figure it out. It is public record that you can look up H-1B visa applications by company. So you can do that through going global, among other places. So if you go to Handshake and Career Resources and click on the link to going global, you can filter and see, who is sponsored for this job title, the company, the location, the salary, and when that was. So that might help you get a sense that if this company has sponsored people a lot before, they're obviously going to be a little bit more open to hiring international students. So they may be more open to hiring students on something like CPT or OPT that doesn't involve lawyers or other fees for them. If you are in the situation of having multiple offers, that's kind of a great problem to have. You can, allude to the fact that other employers are interviewing you, or if you have an offer, but this other place would really be your ideal situation. There are times where that can result in a little bit more urgency in their process if they really want you and you're their top candidate or a better counter offer from that company. It is also always possible that they may kind of directly or indirectly indicate for you to accept the other offer because they may not be able or willing to match the salary, to match the timeline. Like if they just started the interviewing process and they're like, well, we're not going to have made our decision. We haven't even done all of our first round interviews yet. So, it's possible if you're kind of trying to play one offer off of another, that if they say, oh, that sounds like a great opportunity for you, thanks for letting us know, that may mean that they're not necessarily gonna try to make you that counter offer. Be honest about things. You don't necessarily always have to give them this exact job title at this exact company getting you this exact salary, but if they are genuinely going to counter offer you, they might ask you for your offer letter to say, hey, you know, we would like you. You are our top candidate choice, but the salary what you're asking for is beyond the typical expected for this range, so I have to get approval. And so can you, send me a copy of your counter offer and see if we can get that approved? So, if they're going to ask you for information, you can't, totally make stuff up. If you are using a counter offer and you're trying to negotiate at your current employment, know that that can come with risks. You know your own boss and leadership. So there are some folks who, may be very supportive of you or say, I'd love to offer you a raise, but I cannot do that without going through this, special exception process. And if you have a counter offer letter, I could offer you more money to keep you. And some leaders that may hold that against you, whether they meet a counter offer or not, that may reflect on how they treat you. Um, if you are in a situation where you did get a big raise and now you're compensated a lot better than other people in the department, if people find that out, is that going to cause resentment? Will you not be eligible for future raises if you're already at the top of the salary range? If the company is having problems and going to lay people off, would you be on that first list to say, well, we knew that you were looking around and not as committed anyways? These are all hypotheticals. You can never fully plan, but just know that those things are certainly possible. So there are situations where it may make the most sense to take a counter offer, and there may be situations where it is not worthwhile for you to do that or to ask for that. So when you're making your final decision, what are those practical concerns? Like, where would you be living? What's the office like? The commute, the salary? Would you be supported? Do you feel like the colleagues that you met in the interviews or the supervisor, are they people that you would be able to work with well? Do you feel like you would get along? Um, is it going to help you progress your career? So it might not be the most ideal role or company, but is it going to give you more relevant skills and experience? Will it get you in the door at a company you want to stay at long term? Are there unique things about the job that you would get the opportunity to do? Maybe they have a really generous tuition remission or reimbursement policy. So if you say, yeah, I think this would be a good fit and I could stay here a couple of years and get a master's degree paid for, maybe that makes sense, even if not everything about the job is perfect. Is there room for advancement? Are there any potential red flags? So were there any kind of concerning statements? Like maybe there's been a lot of turnover at the office or the company when you ask people what they enjoyed about working there and nobody seemed to come up with much to say, right? Sometimes those might be little indicators that give you a sense that something could be off. And so when you do accept, obviously, express that your excitement. You can give them a decision in writing is generally required for those kind of HR processes. So even if you accept it over the phone, it's often good just to send an email and say, thank you so much. I'm accepting this job title, planning to start on this date for this salary. And so you also will need to stay in contact because there may be paperwork you have to complete before you actually start the job. So like they might have offered you the position before they conduct the background check and it's just contingent on passing the background check. So they might ask you to fill out that form. They might ask you to fill out some paperwork about, your information, like if you have a preferred name or things like that. If you do decide that the offer is not a good fit for you for whatever reason, tell them as soon as you decide that. Don't unnecessarily delay only to just tell them no in the end or just ghost them because you felt like the salary was so low, you were offended and you don't actually ever tell them yes or no. And again, it is helpful to give them a decision in writing, even if you do actually talk with them over the phone or virtually or something. Regardless of how you feel about the offer, be professional about it because you never know what people will change companies in the future. Maybe the hiring manager changes and you would be open to working at that company if it was a different person who would be managing you. Maybe that HR professional changes and then they work at a different company down the road. So same thing, if you're talking with other people, be mindful of how you're framing things. Hiring and training new employees is expensive and it is time intensive. So at the end of the day, it is really better for you, the candidate, and the employer to find a good fit. Because if you accept a job and then you quit in a month because you say, "Oh, this is terrible. I found something better. The salary was really low," whatever the situation was, that's not really helpful to either of you at the end of the day. Because now the employer may have to go through that entire hiring process again. Like if their second choice also found another job in the meantime or something. So they're not necessarily happy with you for leaving right away. Again, even if maybe you would be open to working at that company in other roles in the future, that could be a problem. So if you really think that you don't want it, you're not going to stay there for kind of at least a little period of time, it's probably better for you to just turn it down and be honest about that. There is kind of this concept, so reneging or kind of going back on a job, trying to revise a job offer after you already agreed to things. So once you have accepted it officially, don't keep trying to negotiate. If this is the people that you're going to work with, your boss, that generally doesn't set you up for a good experience if they feel like you said one thing and now you're changing your mind or you're kind of going back on what you agreed on, does generally kind of reflect poorly. There are situations where sometimes that just happens and it is the right decision for you personally, and that's okay. Sometimes you might find out that your significant other just lost their job, and so you can't afford to take a pay cut to move to a better working environment, or, maybe you're moving or something. So if you do have kind of a real legitimate reason, just be professional, let them know that, and just politely explain. You don't have to give them all the details, but that often will be helpful versus if it just feels like, no, I agreed about this job. I was excited about it. And then 2 weeks later, I accepted another job. And so now I'm not going to do this anymore. There are some companies that will kind of note that on your file, as it were, where they might not consider you for other roles at that company in the, near future. Other places really don't, you never know. Most employment in the US is at will. So outside of discriminatory reasons, you can generally quit or you could be fired for any number of reasons at any time. There are some jobs that are contractual. So like if you signed a contract and you said, yes, I'm agreeing to work for this time frame or these things, or maybe you got some sort of like bonus, there might be a situation where if you don't work for X amount of time, they may expect to be repaid that. To say, well, we paid for, this moving location and then you quit in 2 weeks. So you have to give that money back to us and you've already spent it, that might be a problem. So just know what you're getting into, what that risk would be if there is a particular situation like that. And finally, just consider everything an employer has to offer. There's a lot of things that can make an impact on, your daily living and contentment. So don't just focus on salary because some companies may have really great health insurance, retirement matching benefits. So even if it's a slightly lower salary than another place, you might actually do better for yourself in the long run because you're saving more money. Don't overly rely on any kind of vague promises or future considerations. So if they say, well, this is as much as we can offer you now, but, maybe in a few months we can kind of check back in. And if you're doing well, maybe there'll be potential to raise your salary. Like those things can happen and do. But again, if they're just kind of speaking in generalities, don't assume that that will happen, um, Sometimes an individual supervisor might say, well, this is the policy, but I'm willing to be flexible with you about this. Because again, if your supervisor changes down the road or administration says, no, actually, you should never have promised this person this policy exception, that could change. Just be respectful, whatever the situation is, and try to avoid appearing overly emotional when you're negotiating. So, if it sounds like you're getting really frustrated or upset or angry, that can sometimes impact that process. So, it is okay to disagree politely or to decline an offer or to ask for more information. But again, consider your tone, how you're feeling when you're doing this process, and be willing to walk away if it's really not a good fit for you. If you say, this is how much money I need, and it's not anywhere close to that, then yeah, that's okay. Like, it's nothing wrong with politely declining an offer. Just don't kind of burn bridges. It is okay if you want to share and say, I think this would be a great opportunity. I loved meeting all of the staff there. Unfortunately, this would just not be possible for me because I would be taking a pay cut. So I understand if there's not any room for that, but I'm going to have to decline, because sometimes that actually can help someone in the future if they say all of our top candidate choices decline this job because they're not willing to work for this low of a salary. Maybe that's something the company changes in the future, or maybe they don't. So you're not obligated to really providing information. Don't over explain yourself, but up to you if you want to say anything. You can always find more information and resources on our connections department page. So some of those links I mentioned to you, or information about job searching, things like that, you can find there. Handshake obviously has other career planning development center events, job postings, all of those things. So thank you so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.